Welcome everyone to our Cardea users group meeting. Today is June 23rd, the day after solstice, I believe.
Or the day after the day, 2 days after.
Beautiful day of the year, in my opinion. We meet under the auspices of Linux Foundation, and so we adhere to their antitrust policy, which is noted in the meeting minutes. Basically, do not discuss specific business opportunities nor pricing, things that might help us stay clear of antitrust laws in the United States and elsewhere. We also meet under the Cardea Code of Conduct, which is listed in the URL for that in the meeting notes. It can be summarized as be nice to everyone and everyone has a voice. If you wish to participate but don't wish to speak, you can add comments to the meeting chat and those will be voiced for you. We are, if we have problems with Code of Conduct, please contact either Keela or myself. If you have problems with either Keela or myself, please contact the Linux Foundation Public Health and they will help resolve any conflicts or potential problems. With that, let's jump into introductions. Anyone who would wish to introduce themselves today? Most of the names and faces here are familiar faces, so we'll move on to our Interop 3 recap. And like to first thank everyone who participated at the Interop and made that a success. Interop events are critical to making sure that we have a solution that is not theoretically interoperable, but is practically interoperable. Our Interop event was held last Thursday. We had a couple of new attendees and some old familiar faces. We got our doc up. We want to pull that up? Should I pull that up? I'll pull that up.
I have it up also. I can be scribing while you are reviewing if you'd like.
Let me try to get that to work this time. There we go. So our Interop was last Thursday. We had participating organizations testing out the interoperability of not only the medical aspects, which are the primary focus of Cardea, but also the some of the Aries components and touch on the machine readable governance as well. The third event was, I believe, a success. Our goals for that were to break up the testing into more modular tests that could be run without having to run the entire sequence end to end. This allowed us to help people who were stuck on one particular aspect to not be thwarted from any further testing, and I think that was successful. We did test some basic connection stuff again. The DIDCOM V1 and out of band connections were tested. The agents that were supporting that, we had quite a variety showing up this time and able to also test Q&A and basic messaging and self-attested attributes, in addition to the flows that were part of the Cardea workflow, which are the credentials for both medical releases, lab results, and vaccination tests, and the trusted traveler credential workflow as well. We had 10 organizations register. That's down 2 from the last time. We had a total of 15 participants, up from the last time slightly. The projects, some were focused on Cardea, some were testing agents where they wanted to see how well it interoperated with the reference implementation and other participants directly. So we had slightly fewer tests conducted, down 2 from our last interop event, but good success. And we had, of the registered participants, we had a couple of new ones showing up that were able to make significant progress and get further down the process. We had a couple of new ones that were able to attend BC government, the British Columbia, BYU, Procivis, IBM, and Afra Automations. We had repeat participants, Liquid Avatar and CETA, who were able to do quite well in their testing based on their previous work and contributions.
Yeah, I think even though the sort of previous slide hints that maybe there was like a less going on, I actually think there was quite a bit of diversity in the participation, would be my observation. From this list, you can see we did have quite a few organizations participate, some of these new, and we had a lot of people come to learn, which is, I think, really valuable. That didn't materialize in them coming today. We'll need to work on, but I do think that there was clearly the word had gotten out, and I think that we had an expanded audience, even if there weren't more tests, or by the numbers, it doesn't quite look like that was the messaging, but it really was quite diverse.
So a couple of new participants. The province of British Columbia was a new attendee, longtime participant in the Aries ecosystem, but new to this interop testing. Also, BYU's presence has been for a number of years, I think 4 years at least. But this is their first interop event as well, and they discovered some challenges with trying to go outside of their own small ecosystem. Mike, you had a hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to speak to the new participant piece here. In the first room that I was helping with, we spent, testing against with Cardea, we spent almost the entire hour talking about how the ecosystem works, what Cardea does, and how does it manage health data, how does it manage government access, what does this workflow mean, really fundamental Cardea introduction that for a new participating organization that so that was one of those things that happened that didn't get captured in the numbers, but was pretty interesting and positive for this Interopathon.
Yeah, I think the new organizations especially appreciated the one-on-one time for both explanations and for testing, and by breaking things up a little bit more granularly, the ability to test and debug specific parts of a more comprehensive workflow. Let's see. So the reference implementation had all of the basic components that were needed to complete the entire workflow. And so we had issuers, a mobile wallet with associated mediator, Cardea verifier, the out-of-band invitations, and machine-readable governance files. And each of those were available to be tested against and also to be substituted out, so that if somebody only brought a mobile wallet, they could test the mobile wallet with all of the other reference components. If they had multiple components, they were able to test each of those against the reference implementation. I think our Zoom room and Zoom format allowed for participants to come who might otherwise not have travel or time budgets to gather in a central physical location. I think that the breakout rooms were an excellent way to organize the tests to allow for multiple things to go on simultaneously. After the reference test implementations were done, then the one-on-one pairings of organizations against each other to test interoperability between them was also useful and provided chances for further verifying the compatibility of the different agents. Are there any comments about our testing format or how we ran the tests?
I think one comment I would make, which is where you were just going around the participant to participant testing, I do think that it was quite powerful this time also, in that some of those new participants did not play well with some parties, but got things working when connecting with others. And so I think that that was really interesting to see happen. And that's sort of why we test with each other in that sort of matrix that we've put together as our template for these interopathons. And so I think that was just highlighting that the format does seem to be valuable. Don't get discouraged early in the process, kind of hang in there and stick with it. And either the bugs will get worked out as you spend the time in the day, or maybe we'll find a partner that you actually do break through with.
Yeah, one example there is the folks at BYU, supposedly had a compatible agent that, works well with the Aries interop profile and everything. And they discovered that when their mobile agent sent a message through, we had two mediators. We had the mediator for the mobile agents, and we had the proxy mediator for the enterprise agents. And when they were dealing with two mediators, they didn't get it double encrypted, to be able to pass through both mediators. And so supposedly they were compatible, but they discovered, based on the setup of the ecosystem that they were now participating in, that there was some small thing that you wouldn't discover in a test harness that came from the format of testing in the real world against other actual setups. So that was really kind of interesting, a thing you wouldn't discover another way.
The triple encryption, actually quadruple encryption, once for HTTPS, once for the first mediator, once for the second mediator, and once for the actual payload, presented a hurdle that they had not encountered before. But in testing with another direct, instead of against the reference implementation, they cut out one mediator and were able to successfully get messages to flow.
Exactly.
Very good. Okay. On our workflow, we had the out-of-band invitations that were tested and allowed for the out-of-band QR codes to be displayed and have that test go forward. We also had a backup for the Connections V1 protocol for agents that are not quite up to the Aries interop profile guidelines for getting agents to connect. So the older agents were able to still participate and get through that part. Any comments on our out-of-band testing and things that we learned from that?
One interesting thing on the out-of-band is that the enterprise agents are doing pretty well at issuing these invitations. And Liquid Avatar's agent was the only mobile agent that is fully ready for out-of-band invitations. And so the mobile teams are working hard on this, but there's, generally speaking, in the Aries community, there's still some work to be done here. And so the interop testing that we did here was probably really, really valuable to the community as the mobile agents try to get ready to support out-of-band.
Agreed.
We'll probably need to test it at least one more interopathon to make sure everybody's got it.
Excellent. Basic messaging. That's pretty much what it sounds like, the ability to send a message that's similar to like a text message between two different agents. We are assuming that for most of the rest of the test that some type of connection was successfully established and that you're building on top of that. Sending the messages back and forth was an interesting test of one of the more basic protocols that DIDCOM implements. Any comments on the success or failures within basic messaging?
So this was also a success, and it was flip-flopped. This time the enterprise agents don't have a UI for displaying basic messages coming to them yet. And so the mobile agents were more mature in this respect.
It's got to get everything in sync.
That's right.
So that's probably to be expected, that mobile agents are more human-centric, and the implementation of a basic message is probably more fundamental to that type of agent. So not out of line with expectations. On our the demographic information workflow, we had two different options. Comments on the requesting the demographics versus the editing them and filling them in.
So this, doing it in this format successfully unblocked some of the participants, where before we had a whole chained together workflow. And if you couldn't support Q&A, question and answer protocol, or didn't have the ability to do a self-attested presentation, then there were some participants who got stuck, who couldn't make it through the whole workflow. By breaking it out into independent steps and allowing for that edit button fallback position, everybody was able to get through the demographics collection part of the, if you were doing a full workflow, people were able to get through that.
What kind of damage to the reference implementation was done by having to break it into two options here? Was it serious or minor changes to the UI to allow for both methods?
I think that we're going to have to examine it. Effectively, the reference implementations, the GitHub repos are not in a state where I would say, yeah, take this to production and use it. The independent workflows are, not 100% conducive to how you run things in production. So demographics is one of our near-term sticky issues that we kind of have to sort out to say, how is this going to work if people were to deploy Cardea in the wild? How can we support that and allow for the full workflow without having people having to do things manually? Because you don't want someone sitting behind a computer to have to click every button to get a patient through the process and to know what order to do that in. And our automated workflow is kind of stuck on the demographics at the moment.
Sounds like a really good priority roadmap item, maybe.
Yep.
So the code is in a workable state. It's just not in a fully automated state at this point. So
Right.
Figure that out for the next go. The medical release workflow, comments or medical release is the allowing a patient to consent to the medical records being shared and having a record for the medical organization to keep, so that they can prove that they were acting in accordance with the patient's wishes in releasing the data, even though it was released directly to the patient. But this is a part of a full consent workflow to help make the full solution more compliant.
I believe for any agent that was able to make a connection, I believe all of them supported the issuance and then presentation of the medical release credentials. So I think this part was pretty universally a success.
Cool. Issuing the actual health credential, Mike, there are 3 different types of credentials that are issued in the health credential category. Is that correct?
There are 3 schemas available. That's something that needs to be fixed in the reference implementation. It got trimmed down to 1 for ease of development's sake. We have to go back to re-enable the other types of credentials in the system.
So we basically only tested 1 type during our interop.
We only tested lab results during the interop.
And the exemption and vaccination credentials were
Temporarily disabled.
For the interop.
Yep.
Okay. Any issues that we noticed with issuing the lab result?
No.
And what needs to happen to make the other ones supportable again? Is that, was that part of breaking, like the atomic thing kind of messed that up?
Yeah, the trickiest part was we weren't able to get, we've updated how the machine readable governance works. We were unable to get it up to date for exemptions and vaccines, especially vaccines because they're so complicated. We weren't able to get that up to date in the reference implementation in the GitHub repo in time for the interopathon. So we just
so
have
that
to,
it's really just the machine readable governance layer.
pretty much.
Okay.
We're working on merging code for that at the moment. We just didn't make it in time for the interop.
Excellent. Trusted traveler issuance. Do we have any that's should follow, I would think, this near similar path to the lab result issuance? Were there any variations on that?
Did anyone actually get to a trusted traveler during this interop? The session where I was testing CETA against Cardea, we had so many questions about the fundamentals of the ecosystem and the process that we didn't get that far. We ran out of time even with a full hour. Did anyone else get that far?
I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure I got there with the PCCO.
Nice. So as far as I know, this didn't happen a lot, but I don't think we ran into any new problems arising from trying to go through this part.
I would imagine not, and I think it's more important to answer the questions and help other developers understand what's going on than to skip over their questions and rush through a second example or a third example or a fourth example of issuance. I think this is, if you count the medical release, and the
Lab result,
you're getting through more of the workflow that is unique and critical than to do one more credential type issuance during an interop event. It's far more important to facilitate the people and the understanding than it is to test another variation on something that has already been tested twice. So I think that's an appropriate balancing. And for those who did make it through, then I think that's, you know, kind of a claim of victory lap and for completeness. Trusted traveler verification. This is the final step in the comprehensive workflow, but Simon, were you able to take anyone through the trusted traveler verification as well?
No, we never reached that part.
Okay.
Again, this is a second example of verification.
I was gonna say the same thing. Yeah. Because if you verified the lab, for example, it's really just verification, the verification step.
Or if you verified the medical release really early on in the process, you know, lots of people were able to verify the medical release, and the verification of the trusted travelers actually simpler than verifying the medical release. So the only piece that we didn't really exercise a lot was the machine readable governance on the government agent to go through the verification of the details of the lab results and their application for entry into the whatever country the government agent was representing. That didn't get a lot of exercise, but issuance and verification had plenty of work.
Cool. So overall summary was the atomic testing was provided for better test comprehensiveness due to any problems that test participants were experiencing in earlier comprehensive workflows. The atomic testing helped us get past that. Would all of those hosting the rooms agree that the atomic testing was better?
I think that for the intended purpose of the early interopathons, the atomic testing was better. I think that going forward, it's a positive sign that the Aries working group is looking at running an interopathon, and that Phil Windley mentioned having some interopathon type activities at IAW. That may allow the testing of basic DIDCOM and basic operations to be shifted to those organizations and communities that are focused on that, and allow Cardea to now pivot to focus on medical and the full workflow again. So for the intended purposes of this interopathon, atomic or individual testing was a huge success. And I think going forward, we may not have to do it that way. We may be able to focus on what Cardea is meant to be for.
I think that it's may be useful to have the ability with the reference implementation anyway, to do atomic testing of a more focused on the Cardea bits, but it still allows for early failures to not block later successes. So I think that's a consideration we need to take in planning out our next interoperative.
Yeah, we'll have to see if there's some way we can get the two to continue to live together, because you're right, it is a nice fallback.
We did have a,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, especially as we're trying to get more people engaged in this community. I think I made this point at the end of the interopathon, like having to be a part of a bunch of communities, and I have to go here to do this piece and here to do that piece, and you can't kind of accomplish it all in one place, I think might add some unintended barriers for those that are less steeped in this space. So having it available is really beneficial, in my opinion. And we've gotten some people to come to do like out of band testing that otherwise didn't know about, right? Like there's some cross-pollination is a good thing, I think.
So having the ability to do some of the testing for basic connections, basic messaging, Q&A protocol, those sorts of things, I think is a useful modular set of tests that we can offer still. I think the emphasis should shift towards more of the Cardea focused stuff, but having the ability to say, can you do a basic message? Can you do an out of band connection? If you can't, here's how to do a connection V1 setup instead. But I think that has been useful. I think commenting on the diversity of organizations, we had some people from our previous interops that were unable to attend, and we had a few new organizations, 3 or 4 new organizations that came and were able to participate. So I think we need to continue to work with our previous attendees to get them to attend and test on a regular basis. And then the new organizations, I thought that was a highlight of this particular interop. No Zoom bombing this time. That makes for a more pleasant experience. I appreciate Keela's effort in setting up the Zoom rooms and the Zoom format so that we were able to keep legitimate participants in and avoid having non-legitimate participants try to ruin our session. Other comments on successes that are not listed here? All right. Lessons learned. This is always a fun thing. Part of what we hope to get out of an interop event are lessons learned. If everybody shows up and everybody performs perfectly, then we don't need interop events. But the fact that we did have a variety of things that were learned that were not caught by the test suites or other mechanisms indicate that there is still value in an interop event. The recording of setting up the Cardea environment so that people can pre-test might be a useful step. It's been suggested to help participants get early testing against the reference implementation. Having the servers open and available earlier is also a suggestion. I hope that we are keeping the servers open post interop so that people can go back and fix the problems that they discovered and have a mechanism for being able to test that. Are the servers still up, Mike?
Yes, they're still running.
Good. Do we have a mechanism for people to be able to actually use them?
So in order to prevent them from being defaced or messed with having open credentials, it's on an invite basis where someone can email me or Kim and get a username and a password, an invitation to join the system so they can get in and use it. So we do have to do on an invite only basis, but once they have that invite, the domain names and servers are all public and easy to get at 24/7.
Excellent. Keela, can you make a note in the minutes for the meeting that those who wish to test against the reference implementation should contact Mike to get credentials to be able to use those servers?
I sure did.
Cool. This one, full workflow can be disrupted by atomic tests. So we, I think, did some collateral damage to the full workflow as we put in atomic testing to break things up. It made it so that the full workflow was more difficult to get tested. So I think we need to test our full workflow after we make the atomic stuff available to make sure that we haven't disabled it or made it impossible. I think having mobile team engineers on hand to help debug mobile interfaces would have been an organizational thing that we could have done as interop hosts to make sure that we had that debugging capability as well.
Yeah, they may have just felt that they had higher priorities or were too busy. So that's a, kind of an organizational thing. Because I don't think anyone excluded them, but I don't think they felt like they needed to be there. So they felt it was optional and then didn't come. So if we really need them there, then we can try and enforce that and say, hey, please make this a priority.
Or at least on call,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great idea. Our master debugger, Mr. Kim, was able to help a number of participants get debugged through some of their code, but his suggestion was to have the participants come with an agent, at least one agent, that is pre-configured in debug mode so that they can work through the issues. This is not intended to be just a showcase of already functioning agents. It's intended that if we find any bugs or problems that we're going to try to work through them immediately to help locate where those problems are. So having an agent that can participate in debug mode would be useful for that. So that's a recommendation that we should put out in our invite for the next Interopathon.
BYU in particular had really good instrumentation for capturing their debugs as they went through the system. And for the mobile agents in particular, coming pre-configured for debug is an important thing because it takes a little time to do in advance. It's not like the enterprise agents where we are logging things by default. Mobile agents need a little setup. So I like that recommendation a lot.
Good. We had one participant that had a very poor mobile internet connection, so that it was difficult to tell whether the problems encountered were due to agents not communicating well or whether the internet was the problem. So that's another recommendation that we can advise participants on to make sure they have a good internet connection. Another suggestion was to have versions of base libraries or core technology be identified in the agents that are participating. So if they're, for instance, relying on the Akapai, it might be to publish which version that their code is based on. That way, if there are known issues with particular agents, that those can be ferreted out more readily. We have in the past called for bring your own network if the people wanted to test additional networks as the fundamental ledger technology underneath. We ought to publish the default network that we're using for the core testing. That way, if there's variations from that, people know that there is a variation and they can appropriately adjust their software to use the appropriate network. As the did indie method spreads, hopefully we'll be able to accommodate networks on the fly and allow for that to be part of the schema or did resolution to correctly identify the network that a particular credential is based on and resolve that to the appropriate did document schemas or cred defs. Any comments on networks? Did we have anybody who brought a network outside of the default network that we were using?
I don't think so this time.
I think that'll probably be a focus of upcoming interops, as like I said, as the did indie method makes it into more and more production code. Publishing the interop profile in a publicly accessible location. I think we went to the trouble of getting one prepared, but not necessarily getting it publicized in a readily accessible spot this time around. So I think that would be useful as well. Comments on the interop profile?
That's solely on me this time. We'll make sure it happens next time. Since I have less writing to do, I can do more publishing.
Write less, publish more.
Yeah.
Communication channels, I think we mentioned it in our introduction session at the beginning of the interop event, but there were people who had problems with the introduction session. So it might be good to publish on the interop data that's going out about the event, which channels they can use as backup to communicate with people. If the main Zoom is not working for them, how do they reach out using the Cardea Slack? How do they, can they email, can they text? How do they contact people for support in getting connected or resolving Zoom problems?
I think this one also touches on how it was, since we had so many new people, like where did they learn about the Interopathon event, right? So maybe as they sign up, sort of, how did you hear about this as a question would also be valuable, so that we know from an outreach and engagement perspective, you know, where were those messages being heard?
Okay. So next interop, let's add that to the next interop suggestions.
Okay.
So we had a number of people who signed up from Asia who did not show up to the actual event, partly because it's probably in the middle of the night for them. I don't know if I would show up. It's a difficult thing to do, to be completely out of sync on time zones. So we had a number of participants who did show up, some who showed up early and participated in the early sessions, some who showed up to the later sessions. And so offering that as a early versus late preference might be a way to encourage participation and not be as burdensome on time zone. The suggestion of a second time session, perhaps for those in the Asia Pacific region, might also be helpful. Automating the calendar invites, due to the Zoom bombing that we had previously, getting a universal calendar invite out is a little bit more difficult. We're trying to tie that to a registration so that we don't have random people showing up and disrupting our meetings. We're looking at a potential Aries Interopathon, not sponsored by Cardea, maybe the same people who are doing it, helping to help the Aries community hold an event to focus primarily on the Aries protocols, the underlying connections, basic message, those sorts of things, in the second half of August. The Cardea community, I think, is interested in having the Aries community take on some of the Aries specific testing that reduces some of the complexity and burden for the Cardea testing itself. That would help allow us to take the next step, which is to refocus on our health tech exchanges and less time spent on basic message, out of band connection, and so forth.
We proposed that to the Aries community a couple of weeks ago, and since then I haven't been able to attend the Aries working group. So Sam, is there any, if Sam is on the call and available, is there any update from the Aries working group on this, or do I need to show up to help push that forward?
I think the next step was to sort of propose hey, here's what we think we should cover in the event. and maybe some suggestions on dates. Coming to a consensus without a proposal is hard. And so I think what's kind of next there is a proposal to say, hey, here's what we think we should do and when. It hasn't come up. We have some good rousing discussions on other topics, but that didn't hit the agenda.
Okay. I will put it on my to-do list to work on that proposal so that we can get that moving before we run out of time.
That'd be awesome. It doesn't need to be the most complete plan, but I think just a sketch of like, hey, here's when we think we should do it. Here's the format. Here's, how long we anticipate it taking, and then here's the things from like AIP2 that we anticipate covering, I think would be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Next couple of suggestions for operational things in our next interop. The host to manually block video. I think that's to avoid questionable video content from sneaking into the recordings. I don't think there's a lot to discuss there. A reminder to record. I think that should go in the note-taking for the session introduction. So each test session in the steps, it should probably go there.
That's a good one for the scribes that are taking notes to manage, where they're paying attention to the document, So the rooms that had scribes, it was a very beneficial service that they provided. And so, if we can get a room scribe for every room and have them provide the reminders for recording, that seems like a good way to handle that.
Or even be the one responsible for recording if they're scribing already.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Good internet connection's a must, and that's for both the participants and the room hosts and the scribes in order to be able to effectively manage the entire interaction. Continue the room scribes. I think we just heard some positive feedback about that. Any negative feedback on room scribes? Were there people acting as scribes that had a negative experience or problems with that? Okay. Targeting September, October for a slightly larger gap between interops. Doing them every 3 months is a little intense. Doesn't allow for sufficient preparation either by the hosting people or the participants to get their testing done and ready for an interop. I think having them spaced out just a little bit further would benefit all of us. There was a suggestion that we provide some focus on the UI UX parts of Cardea. We haven't really had a tremendous emphasis there. It's been primarily on the underlying tech. So there's been a request to look at UX and UI type of experience and workflow problems and areas where the terminology doesn't always line up between agents. So what one might call a verification, another might call validation, another one might call checking. So some of those issues are also useful in trying to help a more uniform workflow to occur. And then suggestion that has already been mentioned by Keela, the ask participant where they heard about that, so we can repeat the knowledge transfer of new and promotion of new interop events along those same channels so that participants can find out about them and participate. Other next operational suggestions that aren't on the list?
As you mentioned, Ken, there was some mention of would we consider doing something at an in-person event? And so I think my suggestion on that was, since everybody loves this format, maybe we can find a way to do it as like a hybrid event. So it can be, you know, for those that are in the room, we can still be in a Zoom and be in the room.
Some of the feedback was that, my feedback was that I can see better what's going on participants' screens when they Zoom share them than I have had in previous interop events where I was in person trying to help organizations test technology, where all that was available was a single laptop screen, and people were like trying to hunch in and have 5 people look at a single laptop screen. So I think the Zoom hybrid event, even if it's done even if there isn't an in-person interop event, to supplement it with and include Zoom or other video sharing so that remote participants can see and people who are in the room can still see. Cool.
So it's been suggested that we do an interop event in conjunction with IW, not for Cardea specifically, but for the Aries variety. And Ken, your observation about that is really relevant. I think that part of the benefit of doing something like that would be more about the visibility of it happening, right, than the actual deepness of the interop testing itself, which sounds silly, but it's a little bit like we're doing this in public so that the public is aware, not so that we can make as much progress as we would in a more dedicated event. So it'd be an interesting opportunity. If we do so, it's likely going to turn into, yeah, but I think we should standardize and test on my thing conversation if it's done sort of that widely. So that would be an interesting concept to pursue, but would, but it's obvious based on your experience, Ken, that maybe we should search or seek for sort of a lighter testing rather than a deeper testing.
Yeah, I think that there's an advantage to having piggybacking on an in-person event because you have a higher rate of participation. you have higher visibility of the event so that both the value that is derived from it is higher as well as the people can observe and see what's going on and see that there is interop testing occurring. So I think there's some great value to piggybacking with a in-person, but I think having a hybrid type event is probably the best of both worlds because you can also get remote participants and remote viewing. Cool. Need to wrap it up here pretty quick. The recordings and the notes repo are in this link. The link can be added to the meeting notes so that people can find where this is without having to come to this particular file. And last but not least, our code repositories, the agents, the GitHub, the schemas, everything is publicly available. And we're trying to make that as broadly available so that people can continue their testing between interop events. Other comments about our interop before we move on to our second topic for the day? I, again, want to thank everybody who participated and made the event successful, both from a hosting and from a participant testing standpoint. It really does make the progress and the entire community move forward by sharing the experiences and discovering how well agents are working with each other. Comments on the white paper. Keela, you want to talk about that for just a second?
Sure, and we have gained Trevor in the flesh, in the virtual flesh here. So Trevor can also speak to it. Trevor?
Sure. What would you like me to say?
It's out.
Yes, it's out. I know you asked, have we seen any reaction? All I can say is that the looking at the bandwidth, there's been a big increase in bandwidth. So I guess people are downloading it.
Awesome. Cool. So maybe for our next, we're a couple of weeks away.
We don't have super. One thing we've overlooked in the Cardea.app is Google Analytics. So we don't have detailed analytics, just broad visitors and bandwidth usage.
Okay. So Trevor,
2,000 visits in the past month.
Cool. Congratulations. Trevor is not only our primary author and editor of the white paper, but also its guiding shepherd to get it through to publication. We appreciate all the hard work, Trevor, that you put in getting the white paper to publication. Thank you.
And I'm particularly indebted to all of you, but especially Mike Ebert for helping me get there.
Thanks to Mike too, then.
There's one more order of business.
One more order of business. What's that?
Next week is a 5th. June has a 5th Thursday. So I don't know if we want to take our 5th Thursday off and be proud of our accomplishments, or if we want to tack on an agenda for our 5th Thursday, which is a wild card. Any thoughts?
I vote taking it off.
I think after the tremendous push for the white paper and for the interop, let's take the week off.
All righty. So then we'll see.
Any objections? Simon?
Keep in mind that if you object, you have to host the meeting.
Yeah.
No objections.
All right. Okay, so then we see everybody again on the 7th, which will be an introduction, high-level review. Maybe we'll have some more information on feedback of the white paper, things like that.
Thank you, everybody. Anything else? Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks.